Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just about a minute.
We lose Tom? Oh no, you're moving. Never mind. I thought you were frozen.
No, I'm just very still.
Impressive. I don't have that level of self-control.
Tom is a part-time ninja. Yeah.
My secret is out. Well, I am delighted to see so many names that I recognize. Many of you I've met personally, and others I have only used your materials. So I'm equally glad to meet you as well. And of course, welcome to everyone whom I don't know. This is the Revelation Reception Network, and we host all things related to the reception of Revelation. My name is Tom Schmidt, and today I have the pleasure of introducing to you all Giovanni DiRusso. Giovanni is a Harvard PhD candidate in the study of religion, and his research focuses on late antique philosophy, theology, and narratives between Greek, Syriac, and Arabic speaking communities of both Christian and Muslim extraction. His dissertation is on computational, historical, and philological methods regarding textual variance concerning popular Christian apocalyptic writings in Arabic. I should say the most popular Christian apocalyptic writing in Arabic, the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter. Today, he is sharing with us his findings regarding the New Testament book of Revelation. His talk is entitled The Earliest Translation of Revelation into Arabic, Examining the Book of Revelation in the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter. Please join me in welcoming Giovanni.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you all for including me. I'm just going to make sure that my slides still work. Please let me know if you can see them and if they're not obscured by anything. Okay, fantastic. All right. The reception of the Book of Revelation among pre-modern speakers of Arabic remains little studied in the Western Academy. Foundational questions in this field remain unexplored, including a full documentation of the pre-modern translations of the text in their full variety, as well as an assessment of their relative priority. In this talk, I will be introducing you to, to what may be the earliest extended translation of the Book of Revelation into Arabic that it survives today. These are the extended quotations of the Book of Revelation found in the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter, which is also sometimes called the Book of the Rolls. I will occasionally refer to this in abbreviated form as the AAoP as well. I will begin by introducing the AAoP, giving arguments for its date of origin and outlining its broad structure. I will then explore the portions of the text that overlap directly with the Book of Revelation, noting how the text reframes and reinterprets these among the visions Peter receives from the risen Christ. In the third part of my talk, I will compare the quotations of the Book of Revelation in the AAoP with the other recensions of the text in Arabic, showing that it differs significantly from them and likely originated independently and before. In the same part, I will also note some features of the text that point to it being translated from a Greek archetype, possibly with an ad hoc or a non-Harklian Syriac intermediary. These considerations make the AAoP an extremely valuable witness to the reception of Revelation outside of and before the Copto-Arabic interest in the text that began in the late 12th century. Lastly, I will provide evidence that themes and images from Revelation are integrated elsewhere in the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter, particularly in his discussion of the heavenly Jerusalem. By the way, I notice my voice keeps cracking. I'm getting over a sickness. I'm very sorry. I hope you can still understand me. Um, the broader allusions to Revelation in the Apocalypse suggest that the Apocryphon's inclusion of extended quotations of Revelation is neither a late accrual nor haphazard. Instead, it represents a systematic attempt to adapt and interpret Revelation, which is here figured not as an external source, but as part of Peter's authoritative visions and legacy in an Islamic context. I will conclude by reflecting on the implications of the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter for broader discussions of Eastern Christian reception of Revelation and especially its canonicity. I'd like to begin by introducing you to this strange and, in my opinion, wonderful text. Although it has been the subject of relatively little scholarly attention, the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter was among the most popular Christian apocalyptic or apocryphal writings composed in Arabic. It survives in more than 20 complete copies and another 22 excerpted or fragmentary copies, which span geographical contexts from Anatolia to Egypt to Iraq. While there is no critical or complete edition of the text, an edition of the earliest copy, a ninth or 10th century manuscript covering the portions that correspond to the Cave of Treasures, was prepared by Margaret Gibson in 1901, the top page shown here, and a partial translation and facsimile edition of Mingana Syriac 70, a Garshuni manuscript preserving the complete text, was published by Alphonse Mingana in 1931. In my dissertation, I argued that the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter likely originated in a late ninth or 10th century CE context. It specifically originated in a culturally and probably geographically Syro-Palestinian milieu, perhaps in or around Antioch shortly before the Byzantine reconquest of the city. I have also uncovered evidence suggesting that the text was originally written by pro-Byzantine Chalcedonian Melkite Christians and only later appropriated and adapted by Miaphysite Christians belonging to both the Coptic and West Syriac traditions. I do not have time to fully justify my hypothesis about the origin of the text here, but I will briefly present evidence for its ninth or 10th century origin, as this is relevant for positioning it relative to other translations of Revelation. In particular, a king's list that seems to be an ex-eventu prophecy terminates shortly after the Caliph al-Muhtadi, who died in 870 CE, the late 9th century. After the King's List, there is a very noticeable section break, and the prophecies become a lot more abstract, which I believe indicates an end of the ex-eventu portions. This provides internal evidence for the date of the text. In terms of external criteria, a 9th or 10th century date which would shortly antedate the production of our earliest manuscript, which, as I noted, is Sinai-Arabic 508. While the surviving portions of this manuscript do not contain the apocalyptic portions, Georg has compellingly argued that this is likely an excerpt or fragment from a version that did contain these apocalyptic texts, narratives. In particular, the incipit of the copy of Sinai-Arabic 508 promises a discussion of, quote, the end of time, something that is not found in the Cave of Treasures, but which is found in the apocalyptic portions, as you can probably guess. I should add here that our earliest witness to the complete text is the Vorlage of Paris Arabic 76. The Vorlage is dated to 1177, and Paris Arabic 76 is from 1336. This manuscript is the main one I'll be using for my discussions today. Lastly, we can find citations and allusions to the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter in the late 9th through early 11th centuries. For instance, Al-Yaqubi, who died in 898, appears to know lore from the version of the Cave of Treasures that is found in the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter. Perhaps most relevantly for our purposes, a prophecy corresponding to the apocalyptic portions of the text is cited from a so-called Book of Clement, who is the purported author or compiler of the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter, by the Ismaili missionary Hamid ad-Din Akermani, who was active from 996 to 1021 CE. Kermani's citation represents the earliest external reference to the apocalyptic portions of our text, and while it is very brief, it gives a suggestion that these portions were established in the textual tradition by the early 11th century. The Arabic Apocalypse of Peter broadly presents a series of esoteric lore, exegetical explanations about biblical text, apocalyptic revelations, and stories and legal canons from apostolic history. All of these are compiled by Clement of Rome, supposedly, based on either his first-person experiences or information that Peter shares with him in response to a series of questions. Moreover, the apocalyptic and exegetical portions, to which most of the quotations of and allusions to Revelation belong, are given by Jesus to Peter in a post-resurrection dialogue. A detailed outline is presented on this slide. For now, I will highlight that the work may be structured into three very broad kind of arcs or topics that each encompass further smaller narrative units. The first is an adaptation of the Cave of Treasures. The second is a resurrection dialogue and apocalypse by Jesus to Peter. And the third comprises narratives from apostolic history, which are generally framed in Clement's voice. As I will emphasize throughout this talk, the work has an encyclopedic and anthological character that it shares with both other Eastern Mediterranean compositions written at the same time and later ancient and medieval apocalypses more broadly. As you can see in this same chart, the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter is characterized by the extensive adaptation and reuse of independently circulating materials. This is most obviously the case of the Cave of Treasures, which also includes the Testament of Adam. But we may also see this phenomenon at play in several narratives of apostolic history, including the so-called family recognition story from the Pseudo-Clementines, the story of Peter, John, and Paul in Antioch, a version of the Acts of Peter, and canon legal material that likely derives from the Clementine Octateuch. In the apocalyptic discussions, we will find the star of today's show, the Book of Revelation, or at least extensive quotations and adaptations of it. It is important to note that the cases of textual reuse almost always represent significant adaptations of the work in question. With the exception of the Testament of Adam, they are almost never marked off as separate works, least of all with their original title, and they are often rewritten to be in the voice of Peter or Clement, as we will see soon enough. Lastly, these works are often integrated and referenced throughout the AAoP. The Testament of Adam, for instance, not only is straight up put in the text 2 separate times, but is also referenced later on to promote an idealized itinerary of daily prayer for Christians later in the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter. Having introduced the AAoP, I will now proceed more slowly through the section in which the Book of Revelation is quoted most extensively. As I said before, I will prioritize the version in Paris Arabic 76, whose Vorlage dates to 1177, and which I believe represents the earliest recoverable version of the text in terms of structure and narrative units, not necessarily in terms of readings, however. As you can see on this slide, not all of Revelation is quoted or cited, but that which is cited tends to have fairly exact correspondences to Revelation as we have it, the canonical Revelation. In particular, large portions of chapters 8 through 13, 20, 21, 15, 17, and 5 were selected, although if you haven't figured it out from how I put them on here, they are frequently reordered or lighted even relative to one another. The quotations of Revelation primarily occur in the part labeled the fifth part, which follows the King's List and marks a turn towards more abstract prophecies, as I said. The first unambiguous allusion to Revelation, shortly before the more extended quotations begins, occurs when discussing the son of perdition, Ibn al-Halik, who was also called the son of Dan. Specifically, Jesus says, I will send my 2 elder disciples for 1,138 days to warn people about his arrival and caution them against believing in him. While the number of days they will be present on earth is different, 1,138 instead of 1,260, these figures immediately call to mind the so-called 2 witnesses of Revelation 11, chapters 1 through 14, or chapter 11, verses 1 through 14. In fact, Jesus goes on to identify them. Just as much late antique commentary on this passage came to see these figures as Enoch and Elijah, Jesus clarifies exactly the same thing to Peter. He identifies one as a figure seen during the Transfiguration, which corresponds to Elijah, and another as a, quote, ancient or primordial disciple, which most likely refers to Enoch in both Islamic and late antique Christian lore. Jesus continues to discuss the days in which the son of perdition will come without any clear allusions to Revelation before the discourse abruptly shifts, and I do mean abruptly. In Peter's voice, my Lord looked to the left and right, and I saw the angels surrounding him, and he commanded some of them to take me and show me what is destined to happen and what has been hidden from me by my God. 2 angels, Malakan, take Peter and show him a series of visions which are directly lifted out of Revelation. Strikingly, then, we see one of our first changes that the AAoP makes to Revelation. Peter is the subject of the visions and not John. Pretty much immediately, these angels start opening doors, and Peter sees hail, blood, and fire mingled together, which burns a third of the earth and its vegetation. Continuing the images from Revelation chapters 8 through 9, Peter sees a flaming mountain falling into the sea, turning it into blood and destroying a third of the sea life on the ships, as well as a star called Ifsintmus. We'll get to why it's called that later on, falling into the waters and destroying a third of them, the darkening of a third of the sun, moon, and stars, and locusts arrive that torments people but do not kill them for 5 months if they do not have the fear of God written on their faces. We also see the release of the angels of the Euphrates here. Um, However, the tone shifts a bit abruptly without fully recapitulating the content of Revelation between these two parts, because Peter is given a stretched rod and instructed to measure the temple with the same stipulations as Revelation 11. Did I overshoot? I did overshoot. Um, the two witnesses are described again, this time lasting for the correct number of 1290 days, before being defeated by, quote, a beast who rose from the depths of the sea. Their revival is not narrated in, there it is, yeah. Their revival is not narrated as in Revelation 11, chapter 11, verses 11 through 12, and instead the AAoP jumps to a vision of the seven-headed dragon. Again, breaking the order of the source text, Peter describes a woman running away from the dragon, which is in verses 1, verses 1 to 2 of chapter 12, whereas the dragon appears in verse 3. Before the beast commands idolatry and its number is given. In several copies of the text, especially from Egypt, this figure is identified in Coptic script as Muhammad, as we can see here. They claim in Greek it's Serapis, so there's a kind of a twofold identification going on in a lot of these copies. While this story overall resembles Revelation 13, verses 11 through 18, note that there is no distinction between the beast who rose from the sea and the beast of the earth and the dragon. They're all kind of allied into one figure. The vision again shifts, corresponding now to Revelation 20. The Son of Man, corresponding to what is called an angel in Revelation chapter 20, verse 1, seizes the first dragon who was identified as Satan. Peter sees thrones for martyrs and a great throne whitened with light. As in Revelation 20, this leads to the opening of the book of life and the raising and judgment of the dead. The angel next instructs Peter to follow me so that I might show you the bride of the Lamb, the betrothed of the Word, and the essence of the Lord. This is without a direct equivalent in Revelation, but it leads us back into the text because it leads to an extended vision of the New Jerusalem that very closely parallels Revelation chapter 21. We'll get to that later down the line again. After the vision of the New Jerusalem, and again breaking the order of the book of Revelation, seven angels carrying bowls of light come, and one of them shows him the quote great harlot. This account very closely follows the vision of Babylon in the canonical Revelation, chapters 17 through 18, including the very extended poetic lamentations and jubilations over Babylon's fall. There is another excerpt from Revelation 13 again, now describing a quote beast like a dragon, which this time is distinguished from the beast of the sea, if for no other reason than a direct quotation of Revelation distinguishes Revelation chapter 13, verse 12, distinguishes it from quote the first beast. As in Revelation 13:13, this beast has an associated mark, but it is not linked to a specific number, and there is no attempt to identify who this figure is unless it's Muhammad again. Before a break in the excerpting, Peter sees a vision of, quote, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon placed under her feet, but which closely corresponds to Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 through 6, and verses 13 through 17, but it omits Revelation's account of the war in heaven. The excerpting of Revelation is then interrupted by a series of exegetical and questions and oracles by Jesus. Jesus begins this part by asking if he has, quote, seen the wonders, which leads Peter to understandably be very shocked and confused. But unexpectedly, this discussion is again interrupted by a vision Peter gets, this one that overlaps with Revelation 5, or Revelation 4 and 5. Peter sees 24 elders as he's weeping in sadness at the idea of the son of perdition coming. This term, kahina, is likely a semantic calque of presbyteroi, um, and the following narrative unit corresponds closely to Revelation chapter 5, verses 5 through 10, in which a lamb who is implied to be Christ breaks the seal and is praised by the elders. Um, Interestingly, the language here implies that the 24 elders have been introduced before, but they actually haven't been. This implies that a portion of the quotations of Revelation may have fallen out, or it may simply reflect a mistake on the part of the scribe who decided to adapt Revelation in this manner anyway. It could be a form of scribal fatigue given how late this is in the quotations. Um, After the conclusion of this vignette, extended direct quotations or paraphrases of the book of Revelation end, and Jesus discourses for a bit longer on eschatology and the rewards for believers before the AAoP begins its narration of apostolic history, ending the apocalyptic portions. While necessarily abbreviated, several facets of the AAoP's citational habits in using Revelation should be apparent even from the sequential summary of these pages. Firstly, the text mixes extended direct quotations with paraphrase or allusion. Consider how the discourse begins with a very oblique reference to the two witnesses or the abridgment of details about the beast of the earth. The quotations are also regularly interrupted with other narrative elements. These may be short words put in the mouth of an angel to create a transition, or extended tangents by Jesus or Peter covering some other theological topic. In terms of framing, the motif of the letters to the churches is completely dropped, and the seven seals and seven bowls are significantly abbreviated. Instead, as we've said, Peter is lifted up from the Mount of Olives to see these visions by, quote, two angels serving Christ. Possibly as a result of the tendency to paraphrase and cut, there is some equation or slippage between figures in the text who are distinguished in Revelation, or at least its commentary tradition. Most obviously, as I said, the beast of the earth, the beast of the sea, and the dragon are not consistently distinguished. We also see outright substitution of figures to add clarity. Most notably, the Son of Man defeats the first dragon rather than an angel. Last but by no means least, elements of Revelation are reordered relative to their appearance within the source text. While at times awkward and confusing, all of these elements suggest that Revelation in the AAoP is not mechanically copied, but is integrated into a new narrative and theological logic that fits both within the surrounding apostolic discussions and does not presuppose knowledge of the source text for the story to make some amount of sense or relevance. I will also briefly add that there are auto-commentarial elements here. Among the discourses between the vision of the woman running away or the woman clothed in the sun and the elders, Jesus provides clarification about several of the visions. Here's an example identifying the, excuse me, identifying the woman clothed with the sun in a manner that very closely parallels slightly earlier debates in late antique and Byzantine Christianity about her identity, and landing on the side of the woman representing the church and not Mary. Uh, uh, Now that you have a sense of which portions of Revelation are used in the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter, as well as how they are interpreted, you're probably wondering where these quotations come from. Natural question. We might start by asking if they could come from another documented Arabic translation of Revelation. In his 1929 study of Arabic translations of Revelation, Theo Graff identifies four recensions of the Arabic Revelation that originated from different source languages in different times. To compare the translational style, let's look at the description of the foundations of the New Jerusalem in Revelation 21, verses 12 through 14. On this slide, I have put transcriptions from three of Graff's recensions and the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter. Note that I have excluded Graff's recension C, as he identifies this as a revision of recension B, and it is therefore text critically secondary for my purposes. The translation of the form in the AAoP reads as follows. And I saw it had a tall, very elevated wall, on which was 12 gates. On each of the gates was written the name of a tribe among the tribes of the sons of Israel. From the collection of these gates, 3 were in the east, 3 were in the west, and 3 were in the north, and 3 were in the south. I saw this city had 12 foundations. On each of these foundations was one of the names of the 12 disciples of the Lord Christ. While the contents and even sentence level syntax of these passages are fairly close, the version in the AAoP differs significantly in terms of terminology and wording. For instance, the three Urkintians identified by Graf describe the directions in which each set of the three gates is using min nahia, which is literally like in the direction of. By contrast, the AAoP just uses fi, which means in. Uh, the AAoP differs in the terminology to describe the wall, describing it as tall and very elevated, shamachan mutarafan jidan, and it marks constructions such as one of the tribes or one of the gates in a characteristically Arabic manner with singular min and the plural or a plural pronoun, whereas the others keep the plural form, which more closely follows the Greek and kind of, shall we say, non-Arabic stylistic expectations. The differences between the AAoP and the three recensions of the Arabic revelation examined here are stark enough that there is no need to posit direct dependence of the AAoP on any of the major medieval translations of Revelation into Arabic. This divergence underscores that the AAoP is an invaluable source on the Eastern Christian reception of Revelation. If the AAoP is indeed a product of the 10th century CE, it represents some of our earliest extensive translation and quotation of Revelation into Arabic, before the manuscripts used by Graf, and before the commentaries of figures such as Ibn Khatib Kaisar and Bulas al-Bushi, who died in the mid-13th century CE. It may also be geographically isolated from the Copto-Arabic interest of Revelation, in which Kaisar and Bulas al-Bushi took part. Indeed, even if we take the date of Paris Arabic 76's archetype, which is 1176, as a terminus antiquim, and ignore all of the evidence for a 10th century date, this means that extended quotations of Revelation entered Egypt in Arabic several decades before the flurry of interest in the work among Copto-Arabic figures. As one of the earliest extended Christian Arabic projects to not only translate, but also interpret Revelation, the AAoP emerges as an invaluable source for the reception of this text by Christians living under Islamic rule. Since the AAoP's quotations of Revelation are likely independent of other Arabic translations, we might naturally ask from which version of Revelation they were translated. For now, I'll compare it with the Syriac, Greek, Bohairic, and Zahidic Coptic versions of the text, based on their respective critical editions. Because the wording of these editions is so thoroughly transformed, in the AAoP, I mean, I will focus more on loanwords and technical terms that may point to a linguistic origin than matters of phrasing. However, I'll note in passing that the sentence level syntax in general resembles either the Greek or the Herculean Syriac. In other words, there are not clear syntactic Copticisms. We might begin by looking at the name of the star in Revelation 11, verse 8, opsinthos in Greek. Pre-modern translations in general tended to borrow rather than translate this word. Contrast the NRSV, which is, I believe, translates as wormwood. But the way in which they do so can be revealing. In particular, the AAoP calls this isphantamus. Here, the changing of the Greek psi sound into fs is particularly interesting. As is very widely known, Arabic has no sound for a plosive p, so loanwords from languages with the sound need to resolve it in some way. In this period, translations mediated by Syriac or Syriac speakers were more likely to render the Greek p sound as a fricative f, while translations from Coptic tended to turn it into a b, excuse me. The fact that this is rendered as an f sound, even in manuscripts from Egypt, suggests that the term is not mediated by Coptic, but either by Syriac or directly from the Greek. Secondly, we might look at how the term palatea is rendered in passages such as Revelation 11, verse 8. Despite a loanword from palatea existing in Aramaic, the Herculean version does not borrow this term from Greek, nor does the Bohairic Coptic. By contrast, the term is borrowed into Arabic as bilat, while the Sahidic also borrows the term, although I should say this is not decisive evidence for a Sahidic intermediary because of the massive Greek lexical influence on Coptic. It is improbable that the Arabic translator would borrow a Greek loanword when his source text does not use it, suggesting that the author was not primarily using the Herculean or Bohairic. Lastly, and most decisively, we might look at the translations of the gemstones in the New Jerusalem, which correspond to chapter 21, verses 19 through 20. On the slide is a table with the renditions of these terms in the AAoP and other pre-modern Eastern Mediterranean languages. While the Syriac and both Coptics tend to borrow these terms, the AAoP attempts to translate them. However, many of them are obscure and probably text critically corrupt, if I'm being completely honest, and comparison with the Arabic mineralogical tradition may be necessary to shed more light on them. For our purposes, I would like to draw your attention to Chrysolithos and Chrysoprasos. While the other translations tend to straight up copy these into their respective scripts, the AAoP renders both with Dhahiba, gold. Um, Dhaba, gold. Um, you might be asking, why did it do that? The answer to me is clear. The translator attempted to calque these words and broke off the Crusoe morpheme into gold. This could only be done by a translator who understood the Greek terms well enough to know their meaning of the individual components. Since the translator likely knew Greek, it is more parsimonious to infer that he translated directly from the Greek version and this translation was then inserted into the AAoP. Now, it is possible that these are from an otherwise unattested Syriac or Coptic version, or even that the translator used an ad hoc non-Herculean Syriac as an intermediary step. Such a translational technique was famously used by the translator Hunayn ibn Ishaq around the same time. Uh, it is also not clear at this stage if these translations were produced for the AAoP or are excerpts from an earlier pre-existing translation of the canonical revelation. Nonetheless, the best evidence I have at this stage supports some level of engagement with the Greek, making the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter a vital witness for the penetration of forms of revelation translated directly from Greek into the Arabic cultural world. Now, I would like to briefly present evidence for a broader engagement with themes and imagery from the Book of Revelation in the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter. In particular, I want to highlight earlier references in the text to a heavenly or upper Jerusalem, which are ultimately rooted in the imagery of Revelation. The occurrence of these terms far earlier in the text suggests that the later quotations of Revelation are not haphazard or reflective of a later layer of composition. Instead, the imagery of Revelation was integrated throughout the text to buttress its apocalyptic imagery. Among the earliest discussions of the heavenly Jerusalem is Jesus' discourse on the process of creation, where he claims, "We created the upper Jerusalem above the water that is overlooking the third heaven, overlooking the lower Jerusalem, or it is suspended above it. Its structure is of light, its pillars of fire, and its gates also of light. It is established in majesty. Its altar is also of light, and its temple of blazing fire. All of it is immersed in radiance and flame, crowned with splendor, sanctified by the awe of our grace. It is encircled with brilliant light and perfumed with the fragrance of our divinity. From it flows life-giving sense. From its altar flow the springs of the waters of life, for it is set up within our kingdom." Here, the heavenly Jerusalem is envisioned as one of the realms of heaven first created by God. This passage and the surrounding discussion have several striking parallels with early Christian and Second Temple discussions of the heavenly Jerusalem. A really striking one that I found yesterday and don't really know what to do with is this quotation of Papias identified by Nathan, um, where he also identifies the heavenly Jerusalem in third heaven, and strikingly also references this idea that the trees were sapient before the fall, which is also in the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter. And I haven't really found anywhere else. So if anyone knows like a connection here, I'd be very curious about that. But to return to the more superficial topic, um, um, I should note that other mentions of the heavenly Jerusalem are peppered throughout the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter, particularly in association with reward or punishment. For instance, Jesus mentions exclusion or inclusion in the heavenly Jerusalem for those who transgress or follow his commands, which are presented elsewhere in the text. Ultimately, the persistent focus on the heavenly Jerusalem in the AAoP underscores that the apocalyptic imagery of Revelation clearly resonated with the author beyond his adaptation of portions of the text narrowly defined. Moreover, the diverse character of these discussions and their at times surprising parallels with earlier Christian literature exemplifies how the AAoP incorporates lore and attempts to resolve debates that existed in the broader late antique, early Christian, and perhaps even Second Temple Jewish contexts. With its relatively early date and sprawling content, the AAoP proves to be an invaluable source for the dissemination of these ideas in the Arabophone world. In conclusion, I hope to have given you all a taste for some of the striking features of the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter's adaptation to Revelation. Moreover, I hope to have brought it to your attention as one of, if not the, earliest surviving witnesses to an extended translation of the Book of Revelation into Arabic. This extensive adaptation shows the usefulness and relevance that the author of the Apocalypse found in Revelation, but also the ambivalence with which it was held. We must remember that in much of the Christian East, the canonicity of Revelation was not agreed upon, to say nothing of its interpretation, which was even less agreed upon. In this light, it is perhaps not surprising that the author of the Arabic Apocalypse, Peter, adapted the contents of Revelation to resolve interpretive difficulties, or even that he attributed interpretations of some of the visions to Jesus himself instead of a inferior commentator or theologian. If this was indeed intended to render Revelation both palatable and relevant to an Arabic speaking Christian audience, we can see that the author of the AAoP succeeded. His text proved to be massively popular, and sometimes in places far more popular than canonical Revelation, well into modernity. In censoring this text as a witness to an interpretation of Revelation, I hope to have given some sense of its relevance to broader discussions about the reception of Revelation across time and space, as well as the strange and exciting shapes its text could take on. Thank you.
Thank you, Gio, for a very stimulating and philological paper. I have several questions. We have about 17 minutes for questions. If you have a question, please use the hand raise item, and hopefully I'll see you. Sometimes Zoom isn't the greatest about that. If not, start typing in the chat so that we can catch you. Or Nathan, maybe you could jump in if I'm missing someone. But perhaps I'll start off, Gio. That was very interesting. I'm sorting through my questions here, but one I'll ask is that I noticed there's a lot of discussion about the earth beast, the beast from the earth, and
Mhm.
the Quran talks about a beast from the earth. And
Yeah.
in Quranic hadith, in hadith tradition, this beast is often given eschatological roles with Gog and Magog coming and things like that. So I was wondering if yeah, I also noticed that two of the earliest quotations of the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter were by Muslim authors, I think.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering if where you think that focus on the beast is coming from, if that is being influenced by Islam, is it using the same terminology? Do you see
Mhm.
parallels? Could you talk about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm very glad you asked this. This is something I'm still working on for reasons I'll get to in a second. I'll start by answering the bigger picture question, which is the connection of the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter to Muslim eschatology. There is very clearly a lot of shared elements, and I don't really know in which direction the influence goes. Um, but a lot of like even like little details that kind of you keep seeing in figures such as the apocalyptic ahadith or al-Masudi, as well as early Shia apocalyptic in particular, are also found in the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter. A famous one, not a famous one, but one that was kind of important for my looking at the date is this prediction about yellow banners invading Egypt, which some scholars took as a sign that this was post Ayyubid, but in fact, this exact prediction is found in 8th and 9th century apocalyptic hadith. Um, so they're clearly existing in the same space. I don't yet know enough to kind of speculate on direction of influence, um, but I would certainly say it's possible that these were kind of uh, further charged by references either in the Quran or in the Hadith. And I believe the two witnesses also appear in the Hadith as well. Um, in terms of the beast of the earth in particular, something very interesting is that this does not use the same terms. It does not call it Dabit al-Ard, it calls it Haywan. And this tells me that if the Quran is getting it from a getting that imagery from Revelation, it was probably a basically a separate tradition. Now, one that of course might have, as I said, energized this idea of um, a beast of the earth associated with an apocalypse in the Islamic context, but not necessarily the same kind of direct textual stream that eventually led into this compilation.
Thank you. Thank you, Gio. We have a question from Professor Valeriani.
Yeah, thank you. My question is this: can you clarify what you mean when you say adaptation of the apocalypse, or and if adaptation is something different from a direct quotation, and if you could make a list or two different lists of quotation and I would say allusions maybe when we mean this with adaptation. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll also answer your question in reverse order if that's okay. In terms of the list, that is going to be one of the appendices of my dissertation, what is currently a giant Excel spreadsheet of every quotation and its corresponding uh, reference referenced in the kind of current chapter verse system of Revelation and Greek text, as well as probably I'll add Syriac later on, um, as well as allusions that kind of ring the bell of Revelation, but do not seem to be a direct quotation. I prefer the term adaptation, although, as I said many times, the overlap is fairly exact because um, this is not claiming to be Revelation. It's not saying, here's what John saw, here's what I'm interpreting. It completely reinvents the framing as this is Peter's vision that Jesus is giving him. And, there's no letters, the trumpets are replaced with these weird door things. And so that's kind of why I'm more inclined to see it as an adaptation or using the language of adaptation even though it is actually very often a direct quotation or translation.
All right, thank you. Other questions?
I think I saw Anne raise her hand. Is that true, Anne?
I see, yes. Okay, yeah.
Uh, Hold on. You're muted right now. If you could unmute. Uh,
Hmm.
Let me see if I can do it from my side here. Okay, I've asked her to unmute. Um, I think that's not working right now. We'll go back to her when she gets it unmuted. Tom, could I ask a question?
Sure thing, Nathan, yeah.
Sure. Um, there she goes. She's on.
Can I go ahead now?
Please do.
Okay, thank you. I'm very interested in your comment about your description of the text speaking of at the heaven above the waters. And I'm wondering if that could be a reflection of very ancient creation myths like the Enuma Elish.
Oh, yeah, I would believe it. I think it would be mediated, I believe, by other Second Temple Jewish or Christian literature, but I think there's some scholarship, I believe, that those images are indeed ultimately rooted in those kinds of uh, Babylonian or Near Eastern creation myths, is my
Which you could
understanding.
also get, of course, from Genesis 1,
Yeah, yeah.
which has always been canonical, I think, in all
Hmm.
traditions.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's
Thank you.
exciting. Yeah.
Nathan, would you like to ask? And then Lynn's typed in a question that I'll read after you, Nathan.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. And thanks, Gio, for this really enlightening and exciting talk. I have six questions here, but I will start actually with a comment that I wonder if those who are specifically engaging with the text of Revelation in Coptic and Arabic, if you all have any questions or want to enter into dialogue, that's very much welcomed. I think Gio would welcome it as well, since this is kind of a work in progress. But anyway, back to my question. Was wondering, Gio, if you have any thoughts about the relationship between the Coptic tradition in the apocalypse, which is very late. It seems like the reception of Revelation in Alexandria and its environs um, was long and in a certain sense uninterrupted, even when Revelation fell out of favor elsewhere in the
Yeah.
East. Alexandria always, in the monastic communities that were happening up and down the Nile, always seemed to have a certain soft spot for Revelation. And so it carries on in Greek, of course, in in Coptic, there seems to be early use and prolonged use of it
Mhm.
liturgically and in other places. And then certainly also um, in Syriac, a lot of the Syriac reception of Revelation is happening in Egypt. And so I wonder um, if if you see anything going, it looks like the influence you noted in some of the in some of the particularly curious names of minerals and stuff seems to be coming perhaps through Syriac. Is that what you said? And I'm just
I
wondering
think
how, what's going on here with location of the text. Is something going on in Egypt here? Is how is Coptic related? Does regionality have something to do with the reception here?
absolutely. Yeah. So that's like a huge question that I'm trying with what I do not promise to be success to answer in one of my dissertation chapters.
Hmm.
Um, I will say I think the terminology for the gemstones, I think, is you could see as straight derived directly from the Greek, and then some of the phonological features might reflect somebody, either a Syriac intermediary or intermediary who knew Syriac. Um, in terms of the place of origin, I am very tempted to say that the text originated in Syro-Palestine and perhaps specifically Antioch. Although I admit I cannot prove the Antioch part. There's just like hints. Um, and I see it as sort of, um, if not directly influenced by kind of continuing the interest in Revelation that we see in the Byzantine Empire shortly before the rise of Islam. As I mentioned, I think in passing, the kind of auto-commentarial portions very closely align in content, although not wording, with Andrew of Caesarea's commentary on Revelation, which was like shortly before Islam, if I recall. Um, but I will also say we see very early copies in the Sinai, and Martin Haida has also documented that some of the earliest translations of Revelation as Revelation seem to be made in Sinai from Greek, which is to say that there might be a geographically either a geographically Egyptian influence or a kind of nexus of cultures that we can see at sites like Sinai, where we kind of see Greek, Syriac, and Coptic cultural influences kind of intermingling, even if it's not a translation from Coptic per se.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mhm.
Lynn has a question. She said that I was interested in this as well. That the images you presented in your presentation, were those illuminated Apocalypse of Peter manuscripts? And if so, where are you? How do these compare to other illustrated apocalypses? That's very
Yeah.
rare or even almost non-existent in Greek tradition.
Yes. So that is not the Apocalypse of Peter, but they were so cool I could not include that. So, but it is a really interesting text that I want to study more. That is a Egyptian Arabic, I believe 15th century, don't quote me on that part, copy of Revelation with commentary found in that's currently housed in Cambridge, UK. Um, and yeah, I've seen some manuscripts with similar codicological features, but I have not seen uh, any pre-modern or early modern manuscripts of the Arabic Revelation or the Greek Revelation uh, that are illustrated to such striking extent. So it's something I'd like to work more on. And I'm sorry to mislead you all with by putting it with the AAoP, but it was just very exciting and very Arabic. So
Well, I think it's even cooler that it's, you said a Revelation commentary. Do you know, is it Ibn Khattab Kaiser or Bulus al-Bushi or some other?
it's not attributed in the text, but it might ultimately derive from one of them. That's something I want to eventually investigate.
Okay,
Yeah.
wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, thank you. We have another question from Anna Rita.
Thank you very much for your very interesting essay. I would like to ask you, why was Peter singled out to receive such revelations in the Apocryphon? Okay, this came probably from a pro-Chalcedonian community,
Yeah.
but for what I understood. But really, I wondered why this apostle, if the revelation was used so much, so extensively, and as redaction, why was Peter the receiver of these revelations? Thank you very much.
Yeah. That's an excellent question, and I appreciate your asking it because it's something I didn't have time to draw attention to, but I want to. I think you're right that the mere fact of the text being pro-Chalcedonian or even pro-Roman is not enough to explain why Peter. What I do think is the kind of tendency to make Peter and Clement the kind of um, now your second readers called it like a filter or a funnel through which all this lore enters the imagined ideal original form of the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter, and by extension kind of medieval Arabic Christianity. The reason for kind of this attention to them, I think, has to do with um, religious, like the idea of authoritative transmission, and especially counteracting Islamic ideas of tahrif or the corruption of the scriptures. I think there's other parts of the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter that suggest it wants to portray itself as uh, a reliably transmitted document that bypasses, because of certain techniques used by Peter and Clement, that bypasses traditional copying, which we know for a fact didn't happen on multitudinous levels, but it's the way the text kind of imagines itself and authorizes itself. And I believe the reason it's doing that is basically to say, okay, maybe Muslims are telling us that the New Testament is corrupt. Well, we have this other source that teaches the exact same things that comes directly from Shimon Petrus, Simon Peter. That's kind of my current theory on it.
All right, we have maybe time for one more question before I pass it off to Nathan to close things out. Giolin is wondering why John would be a problem.
I
Or is
don't.
he a
So
problem? Yeah.
Um, so kind of there's a two-pronged answer to this. John in Revelation is a bit of a problem because nobody actually knows who that John is. This comes up even in the Byzantine commentarial tradition, where they kind of settle on it being John the Evangelist, but there's clear discomfort, and we see this in earlier Christianity as well. Clear discomfort that he's not identified and that he might not actually be an apostle. Um, in terms of the other apostles more generally, I think it's just kind of it's okay with the idea of them having their own voices and stories, because there is, for instance, the story of John at Ephesus included here, included in the later portions of the text. But I think it wants to kind of subordinate all of their stories to Peter and Clement's kind of filtering or compilatory activities, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Gio, thank you. Thank you so much. Everyone, let's congratulate Gio virtually. I don't know if we have the little thumbs up signs or whatever. And then that was a delightful paper, Gio. Best of luck with your research.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your including me, and I hope I shed some light on a little known topic.
Yes. And Nathan, I think you have just a quick, brief announcement for those of us who remain.
I do, for those who have endured to the end. By the way, we hit a season record today. We had up to 29 participants, so it's really good that this topic drew such a crowd. Congrats to you, Gio, for accomplishing that, and thanks for everybody for joining us today. Just to conclude, I just want to remind everyone that next week, a week from today, minus 1 hour, we will be having our first annual reviews session where we will be discussing 3 recent books on the reception of Revelation that have come out in the last year or two. We're going to have a late antique focus, but also we have a third book. So the one book will be by myself, that will be reviewed by Ian Boxall, who will be joining us, and then Martina Varchesi's book on the early North African reception of Revelation chapters 19 through 21. That will be reviewed, and then Henry Waweru is on the schedule for a book on the reception of Revelation and the place of the apocalypse in modern African theological contexts. So for those 3 books which are on the docket, please join us a week from today at the same link, incidentally. And other than that, once again, thanks to everyone for joining us, and look forward to seeing many of you next week.
Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Gio. Very good. Tom, everything good? I think
Yeah,
we
everything's
can.
great.
I need to rush my daughter off to the store so she can get a birthday present for her friend.
All right. I'll catch you later, Nathan.
All right. Thanks for hosting. Bye-bye.
Yep.